What if the most dangerous person in the Empire wasn't a warrior, but a banished princess? Framed for a crime she didn't commit, Ara's violet eyes became a death sentence. Yet on the harsh frontier of Virex, one man looked at her and saw not a threat, but a person in need. His simple act of mercy would become the catalyst for a galactic uprising. Discover how ordinary kindness can challenge an entire tyranny. The bioluminescent panels lining the coronation hall threw restless patterns across Ara's gown, the light a shifting tapestry of blue and silver. This was her ascension day, the moment she would formally accept the role of Emperor Case's heir, stepping into the position her father had prepared her for since childhood. The air hummed with the energy of assembled nobles, their formal attire catching the light, their faces a sea of expectation. Behind ornate masks of woven energy, members of the High Council observed the ceremony with detached precision. They moved through the ancient rituals with practiced ease, but their gestures carried a subtle deviation from tradition, a careful manipulation of ceremonial protocol. The air itself seemed to change, the hum of anticipation twisting into confusion as the hall's lighting systems flickered erratically. A cold, synthesized voice cut through the murmuring crowd, its tone absolute and without emotion. It declared that Princess Ara had just activated a neural virus designed to cripple the Empire's command structures. Her violet eyes widened in pure disbelief, her mind scrambling to process the accusation. Imperial guards who had stood at ceremonial attention moments before now moved toward her with purposeful strides, their weapons no longer decorative. The glittering hall transformed into a cage before her eyes. The same nobles who had bowed to her moments earlier now watched with horror and condemnation. Her privilege, her protection, her entire identity as the heir apparent, vanished in the space between one breath and the next. The bioluminescent walls that had once symbolized her future now cast accusing shadows across her face as hands closed around her arms. She felt the cool metal of restraint bands lock around her wrists, their activation barely audible over the rising noise of the crowd. The council members stood motionless behind their energy masks, their expressions unreadable, their betrayal complete. The ceremony meant to crown an empress had instead become her very public arrest, the ancient rituals perverted into theater for her downfall. Ara's training fought against her instinct to resist, her mind racing through protocols that no longer applied. The guard's grip remained firm, their movements efficient and impersonal. She caught fragmented images in the chaotic hall, a noble turning away, a counselor's slight nod, the cold certainty in the eyes of those now controlling her fate. The neural virus accusation hung in the air, a lie already taking root in the minds of the assembly. Her formal gown suddenly felt like a costume, the weight of its embroidery now absurd rather than regal. The guards began moving her toward an exit, their formation tight and professional. The last thing she saw was the great seal of the Empire etched above the throne, its symbolism now mocking rather than aspirational. They called it the neural shockwave, a weapon they claimed could only be activated by royal genetics. The High Council projected fabricated data streams above the assembly floor, showing manipulated biometric readings and altered command logs. Their evidence appeared complete and damning, a technical narrative designed to overwhelm any possible defense. The screens displayed complex neural patterns that supposedly matched Ara's unique genetic signature, visual proof crafted to convince those who understood the science. Ara's voice rose in protest, her words clear and measured despite the shock. She denied the accusations point by point, explaining the impossibility of such an attack. But the council had already flooded the communication channels with their prepared narrative, their voices overlapping and amplifying through the hall's acoustics. Her explanations dissolved into the orchestrated chorus of treason charges, each council member adding another layer to the story. They turned her biological inheritance against her, framing the royal family's enhanced neural capabilities as inherently dangerous. Where her ancestors had used these gifts to maintain stability across star systems, the council portrayed them as a genetic flaw that made emperors potential tyrants. Her violet eyes, once a symbol of royal lineage, became proof of dangerous mutation. The very traits that qualified her to rule were reinterpreted as monstrous abnormalities. Across the Empire, the emergency broadcast repeated on every screen. Citizens watching from orbital stations and planetary cities saw the same manufactured evidence. Her face appeared with the words, "Traitor to the Crown," burning beneath it in stark imperial text. The message cycled every 30 seconds, reinforcing the accusation through sheer repetition. Public information terminals that normally displayed civic announcements now showed only her image and the charges against her. The speed of the propaganda assault left no time for doubt to form. In the space of minutes, she transformed from beloved heir to public enemy. People who had celebrated her upcoming coronation now felt betrayed and angry. The Council's control of information flow ensured no counter-narrative could emerge. Their version of events became the only version available, repeated across news networks and government channels. Historical patterns of political takeover show that truth rarely survives the first hours of a coup. Those who seize control understand that reality becomes what they declare it to be, especially when they control communication networks. The Council followed this exact pattern, using their command of imperial media to shape perception before facts could be verified. They created a reality where Ara's guilt was assumed rather than proven. Her formal sentencing took only minutes once the narrative was established. The Council declared her exile to Virex, the Empire's most remote penal colony. There would be no trial, no appeal process, no opportunity for defense. The same ceremony that should have cemented her authority instead became the mechanism of her removal. The nobles who witnessed the events remained silent, their compliance purchased through fear or manipulation. The lie spread through the Empire's communications web, reaching mining outposts and agricultural worlds, military installations and trade hubs. Billions of citizens absorbed the story of their princess's betrayal, their trust turning to hatred under the constant pressure of repeated broadcasts. The Council had not just removed a political rival, they had destroyed her reputation so completely that her very name became synonymous with treason. Virex awaited her, a harsh world where exiles were sent to be forgotten. The transport ship stood ready even as the broadcast continued its endless cycle. Her fate was sealed not by evidence but by narrative, not by truth but by control of information. The Council members watched her removal with satisfaction, their position secure, their power unquestioned for now. The transport ship left without ceremony, its engines kicking up gray dust that stung her eyes and throat. Ara stood alone on the fractured plain, the formal gown from her coronation now absurd against Virex's bleak landscape. The sky hung like a bruised canopy, streaked with orange and purple from atmospheric pollutants. Acidic winds whispered across razor rock formations, carrying the scent of ozone and decay. She had nothing but the clothes she wore, no supplies, no tools, no communication device. The Empire's justice was efficient in its cruelty. Her royal education had covered diplomacy, statecraft, and neural interfaces, but nothing about survival on a hostile frontier world. The first night she sought shelter in a nearby cave system, its entrance jagged and unwelcoming. Her hands, accustomed to handling data tablets and ceremonial objects, tore against the sharp edges of the rock. Blood smeared dark against the stone, each scrape a reminder of how unprepared she was. The cave offered little protection from the wind that howled through its passages, carrying fine abrasive dust that irritated her skin and lungs. Planetary surveys of frontier colonies like Virex typically report extreme conditions, thin atmospheres, unstable geology, toxic soil composition. These worlds serve as natural prisons, their environments doing most of the work of containing exiles. The constant struggle for basic necessities leaves little energy for rebellion or escape. Virex enforced its own sentence through scarcity and hardship, a passive warden that required no guards beyond its own geology. The other exiles watched her from a distance, their eyes narrowed with suspicion. They moved with a practical efficiency she lacked, their bodies adapted to labor and deprivation. They saw her refined posture and delicate features as markers of weakness, perhaps even a trap. New arrivals often meant increased imperial scrutiny, and no one wanted attention from the hunters. She learned to avoid their gaze, to make herself small and uninteresting. Hunger became a constant companion, sharpening her focus to immediate needs. Imperial patrols moved through the settlement regularly, their armored suits scanning for specific genetic signatures. They carried portable devices that could detect royal biomarkers from a distance, their sensors particularly attuned to violet ocular pigmentation. The bounty on her head made every encounter potentially lethal. Even among exiles, there were those who would trade a stranger's life for extra rations or early release. Trust became a luxury she couldn't afford, each shadow a possible ambush. Each offered kindness, a potential betrayal. She adapted through observation and necessity, learning to move silently across the rocky terrain, to find water in condensation collectors, to recognize which native plants weren't immediately toxic. Her royal bearing gradually gave way to practical movements, her focus shifting from empire-wide strategy to daily survival. The violet eyes that had once drawn admiration now required constant concealment. She kept her head lowered, her face often covered by a scrap of fabric against the dust. What remained of her former identity became a liability, a secret to be protected at all costs. Her world shrank to the next meal, the next hiding place, the next moment of safety. Kale noticed the woman's hunger first. It wasn't the way she moved, thin, uncertain, or the makeshift scarf pulled high across her face. It was the careful way she watched a group of exiles eating ration packs across the compound, the slight tension in her posture as they finished and discarded the wrappers. She didn't look like a threat. She looked like someone who hadn't eaten properly in days. His workshop stood at the edge of the settlement, a cluttered space filled with half-dismantled engine parts and salvaged components. The air carried the sharp scent of ozone from his welding torch, and the warmer smell of metal heated by machinery. He kept working on the regulator he was repairing, his hands moving with automatic skill while his attention stayed on the stranger. Helping newcomers carried risks. On Virex, trust often led to betrayal, and kindness could be exploited by Imperial informants. She hesitated at the open doorway, one hand resting against the frame as if unsure whether to enter. Her eyes scanned the interior quickly, taking in the tools, the workbenches, the relative order within the chaos. She expected to be turned away, he could see that much. Her shoulders were slightly raised, her weight balanced toward retreat. This wasn't her first attempt to find help. He reached into a drawer without looking away from the component in his hands, his fingers finding a sealed nutrient bar among scattered fasteners and wiring. He held it out toward her, not rising from his stool, not asking any questions. The gesture was simple, almost casual, as if offering food to strangers was an ordinary occurrence. He didn't demand her name or her story, didn't require explanations or promises of repayment. Her defensive posture softened almost imperceptibly. The tension in her shoulders eased, and she took a half step forward. Days of survival instinct had taught her to expect hostility or negotiation, not this quiet offering. She accepted the bar, her movements cautious but deliberate. The wrapper made a faint crinkling sound in the relative quiet of the workshop. He returned his attention to the regulator, giving her space to eat without scrutiny. His practicality made the action feel normal, undramatic. There was no ceremony to it, no grand gesture, just one person noticing another's need and responding. In a place where every interaction was weighed for advantage, his lack of expectation felt like a different language. She ate slowly, standing near the doorway still, her eyes occasionally flicking toward him as he worked. The simple act of receiving food without conditions disrupted the survival calculus she had been forced to adopt. Her wariness remained, but now it was tempered with something else. Not quite trust, but the beginning of its possibility. He understood the risks he was taking. Imperial patrols increased their scans whenever new faces appeared, and harboring someone without proper clearance violated colony rules. But he had made his choice based on something deeper than policy or safety. He saw a person who needed help, not a problem to be avoided or a transaction to be negotiated. His workshop, with its layers of dust and ordered clutter, had become an unlikely sanctuary because he decided it would be. The nutrient bar disappeared into her pocket halfway uneaten, saved for later. She didn't leave immediately, but stood watching him work, her presence a quiet question in the space between them. He continued adjusting the regulator, his focus apparently entirely on the machinery but aware of her every movement. The hum of the workshop's ventilation system covered the silence, making room for something new to begin. The hunters arrived without announcement, their armored boots making precise contact with the dusty ground outside the workshop. Their scanner arrays had detected unusual genetic signatures concentrated around Kale's workspace, anomalies that matched their search parameters exactly. They moved with trained coordination, positioning themselves to cover all exits while maintaining visual contact with each other. Their professionalism showed in every movement, efficient, deliberate, and completely without hesitation. Kale heard their approach moments before the door scanner activated. He recognized the specific rhythm of military-grade footsteps, the way they distributed weight to minimize noise while maintaining readiness. His hand moved to Ara's arm, guiding her toward a section of floor grating near the back wall. The hidden compartment beneath was barely large enough for one person, designed for storing valuable components against theft, not for hiding people from Imperial forces. She slipped into the space without protest, her body folding into the tight confines. The metal grating clicked back into place just as the main door slid open. Dust motes danced in the sudden shaft of light from outside, each particle illuminated like tiny stars in the workshop's dim interior. She held her breath, her heart pounding against her ribs, every sense focused on the sounds above. The hunters moved through the space with methodical precision. Their bootsteps echoed against the metal floor plates, each footfall measured and purposeful. They systematically checked behind equipment stacks inside storage lockers beneath workbenches. Their scanner wands swept through the air, detecting heat signatures, energy readings, and biological traces. The search pattern covered the entire workshop in a grid formation, leaving no area unexamined. One hunter approached Kale directly, his expression concealed behind a tactical visor. The question came through a voice modulator that flattened tone and emotion. They had detected specific genetic markers consistent with royal lineage in this sector. The readings were strong and recent. The hunter wanted to know about unusual medical equipment or biological samples that might explain the signature. Kale kept his hands visible, his posture relaxed but not confrontational. He gestured toward a workbench where several pieces of salvaged medical machinery sat partially dismantled. He explained he was repairing a neural interface unit from an old clinic ship, the kind of equipment that often retained biological residue from previous patients. His voice remained even, his explanation technically detailed enough to be believable without sounding rehearsed. The hunter's visor tilted toward the medical equipment, sensors scanning the components. The readout confirmed biological traces, multiple signatures overlapping in the complex patterns typical of medical devices. The explanation fit the evidence. The hunter's attention shifted to other areas of the workshop, the scanner continuing its sweep but finding nothing that contradicted Kale's story. After 17 minutes of thorough searching, the hunters withdrew. Their departure was as efficient as their arrival, their forms disappearing through the doorway without further conversation. The door closed behind them, leaving the workshop in sudden silence. Kale waited several minutes before approaching the hidden compartment, his movements slow and deliberate. He lifted the grating to reveal Ara still curled in the tight space, her eyes wide in the dim light. The close call had changed something fundamental. The theoretical danger had become immediate and physical. Her royal status had nearly gotten them both killed, transforming a place of relative safety into a potential death trap. The hunters would likely return with more sophisticated equipment, their suspicion only temporarily satisfied. The incident demonstrated how completely her inherited position had become a liability. What should have been protection and privilege now functioned as a tracking beacon, putting everyone near her at risk. The same biological markers that defined her right to rule now threatened to destroy anyone who offered her shelter. This transformation from privilege to peril had happened in the space of a single broadcast, but its consequences would unfold over much longer. The hunters returned in greater numbers, their scanners sweeping the settlement with systematic intensity. Kale recognized the upgraded equipment, long-range genetic tracers that could penetrate most building materials. He guided Ara toward the cave systems that riddled the cliffs beyond the settlement, their entrance concealed behind a waterfall of acidic runoff. The water's corrosive properties helped mask biological signatures, creating a natural barrier against detection. The cave's interior offered immediate protection from scanners. The mineral-rich rock formations contained deposits that disrupted sensor waves, creating blind spots Imperial technology couldn't penetrate. The air felt cool and damp against their skin, carrying the scent of wet stone and distant geothermal vents. Darkness enveloped them completely once they moved beyond the entrance, their eyes struggling to adjust to the absence of light. The only sounds were the drip of water and their own breathing. In the absolute darkness, ordinary people become disoriented. The human brain relies heavily on visual cues for spatial awareness and balance. Without light, most individuals move cautiously, their steps uncertain, their hands frequently reaching for surfaces to maintain orientation. The cave's environment amplified small sounds and distorted distances, creating a sensory landscape where instinct often proved unreliable. Ara moved through the darkness with unsettling grace. Her footsteps made almost no sound against the uneven stone floor. She navigated around protruding rock formations without touching them, her body aware of spatial relationships that remained invisible. When Kale stumbled against a low ledge, her hand was already there to steady him before he made noise. Her movements showed training that went beyond ordinary survival. Skills they reflected spatial memory, and body control developed through rigorous discipline. He realized her knowledge exceeded what any exile should possess. She identified rock types by touch alone, her fingers reading mineral compositions like pages in a book. She warned him about unstable sections ahead based on subtle air current changes, her awareness extending beyond immediate surroundings. These weren't skills learned on Virex. They represented education of a different caliber, the kind reserved for those who expected to navigate complex environments without technological assistance. The truth became unavoidable in that confined space. Her competence shone through the darkness more clearly than any light could have revealed it. Every confident movement, every precise observation, every calm assessment of risk pointed toward a background far removed from ordinary life. The pieces assembled themselves in his mind: the unusual eyes, the unfamiliarity with basic survival, the sudden appearance coinciding with Imperial alerts. The words formed in the damp air between them. He didn't ask, he stated, "Princess." The title hung there undeniable. Then the rest followed, quiet but certain. "You're the heir." The cave absorbed the sound but not the meaning. The darkness seemed to tighten around them, the space feeling suddenly smaller, more significant. Her silence confirmed what words might have denied. She didn't startle or protest. The truth had been waiting for this moment, floating between them during repairs in the workshop, during shared meals, during conversations about nothing important. The Imperial broadcast had described a monster, a traitor, a threat to civilization. The woman standing in the darkness was someone else entirely, someone who moved with grace under pressure, who accepted help without entitlement, who carried her secrets with quiet dignity. The revelation changed their relationship fundamentally. The mechanic and the exile vanished, replaced by a citizen and his sovereign. The dynamic shifted in the space between one breath and the next, the cave walls witnessing a transformation that would eventually transform an empire. Her posture straightened almost imperceptibly, not with arrogance but with acknowledgement. The truth once spoken couldn't be unspoken. The darkness that had concealed them now concealed nothing. She confirmed with a single motion, a slow, deliberate nod that felt heavier than any words. The truth now occupied the space between them, solid and undeniable. Her identity transformed from suspicion to fact, from possibility to certain knowledge. The cave's darkness seemed to press closer, absorbing the weight of the revelation. This was no longer about helping a stranger survive. It was about sheltering the Empire's most wanted fugitive. His complicity became immediate and absolute. Merely knowing her true identity made him guilty of high treason under Imperial law. The punishment for harboring a royal fugitive was execution without trial, a fact well documented in security bulletins circulated throughout the settlement. His workshop, his routines, his entire existence on Virex now stood jeopardized by this knowledge. The hunters wouldn't just take her, they would dismantle everything he had built, interrogate everyone he knew, erase any evidence he had ever helped anyone. Psychological patterns show how truth instantly reorganizes relationships. The dynamic between them shifted in the cave's damp silence, the balance of power and responsibility recalibrating around this new reality. He was no longer just a mechanic offering help. He was a participant in a conflict that spanned star systems. Her presence in his life transformed his neutral existence into active rebellion. his workshop into a strategic location, his kindness into a political act. He understood now why the hunters operated with such relentless precision. Their scans weren't routine inspections. They were hunting the Empire's rightful ruler. The upgraded equipment, the increased patrols, the focused attention on his sector, all made devastating sense. The bounty on her head explained the desperation in other exiles' eyes when they looked at her. Every piece of the puzzle clicked into place, revealing a picture far larger and more dangerous than he had imagined. She watched his face in the dim light, expecting fear or anger. These were the reactions she had learned to anticipate, the panic that followed recognition, the immediate calculation of risk versus reward. Instead, she saw his expression shift into focused calculation. His eyes moved slightly as he processed implications, his practical mind already working through logistics and consequences. He wasn't considering turning her in or abandoning her. He was analyzing how to adapt to this new reality. His thought process became visible in his stillness. He was considering supply routes, communication methods, security protocols. He was evaluating his workshop's vulnerabilities, identifying which tools could be weaponized, which components could be repurposed. The same mindset that repaired engines was now assessing how to protect an empress. His hands, usually occupied with machinery, remained still at his sides as his mind worked through the complexities of their situation. She became Lara in that moment. Not the title, not the symbol, but the person who must choose whether to trust again. Her decision would determine not just her survival, but the fate of everyone who helped her. The cave's darkness offered a strange privacy for this choice, the mineral-rich walls absorbing her uncertainty, along with the sound of her breathing. She watched the man who had offered food without conditions, shelter without interrogation, and now understanding without judgment. The space transformed around them. What had been a hiding place became a council chamber, a fugitive's retreat becoming a strategist's sanctuary. The dripping water marked time differently now, not just the passage of moments until discovery, but the counting of opportunities until action. Their breathing synchronized in the darkness, a quiet rhythm beneath the weight of shared knowledge. He finally moved, his hand gesturing toward the cave entrance. The movement wasn't rushed or anxious, but purposeful. They needed to return before their absence attracted attention. The practical concern grounded them both, shifting the focus from the immense implications of her identity to the immediate need to maintain cover. The princess and the mechanic exited the cave as potential allies, the truth between them no longer a barrier but a bridge. Kale waited until they were back in the workshop's secure interior before speaking. The words came quietly, measured against the hum of machinery. He had heard things over the years, whispers among mechanics and supply runners about those who still believed. Despite the council's overwhelming propaganda, pockets of loyalty survived across the empire. Some citizens remembered Emperor Case's reign with respect. Others simply distrusted the sudden narrative about his daughter's betrayal. These loyalists operated in absolute secrecy, their existence more rumor than confirmed fact. Contacting them presented immediate risks. Imperial intelligence actively hunted sympathizers using double agents and false flag operations to identify dissent. Many who reached out to supposed loyalist cells vanished into interrogation centers. The council understood that eliminating the princess required also eliminating those who might support her. Their security apparatus designed specific traps using loyalty as bait, counting on hope to override caution. He knew a mechanic named Rin who worked at the spaceport, a quiet man who sometimes repaired ships for clients who paid in information rather than currency. Rin never discussed politics, but his work often involved vessels with modified transponders and unusual navigation patterns. Over time, Kale had noticed patterns in these repairs. Ships that arrived during low traffic periods, hulls with concealed compartments, communication systems with non-standard encryption. These clues suggested connections beyond ordinary smuggling operations. Resistance networks under tyranny typically operate through compartmentalized cells. Each member knows only what's necessary for their specific role, minimizing damage from capture or betrayal. Communication happens through dead drops and coded messages rather than direct contact. Trust is verified through shared knowledge rather than personal relationships. The system prioritizes security over efficiency, accepting slow communication to ensure survival. They arranged contact through a series of dead drops. Kale left a specific tool in a predetermined location near the spaceport, a calibrated hydrospanner that was slightly too precise for ordinary workshop use. The tool's placement and orientation signaled a request for meeting. 2 days later, a response appeared. A data chip concealed inside a fuel filter delivered to his workshop. The chip contained coordinates and a time, along with a single phrase in Old Imperial script. The meeting occurred in a dust-blown canyon, away from settlement sensors. The contact arrived in a weather-beaten ground vehicle, its hull scarred by planetary conditions. He remained inside, his features obscured by glare on the windshield. His voice emerged through the vehicle's external speaker, flat and filtered.
He asked 3 questions about Imperial history, specific details about Emperor Case's early reforms that never appeared in official records.
The questions tested knowledge that only someone close to the royal family would possess. Lara answered without hesitation. She described the agricultural revitalization project her father initiated in the outer systems, a program the council had erased from public archives. She quoted his exact words when announcing the policy to his advisors. She explained the symbolism behind the specific shade of blue used in his personal standard, a detail known only to family and trusted staff. Her answers contained the nuance of personal experience rather than academic study. The vehicle's door slid open. The man who emerged wore the practical clothing of a frontier mechanic, but his posture straightened as he approached. He looked at her directly for the first time, his eyes scanning her face before settling on her violet eyes. He didn't bow, but his slight inclination of the head conveyed recognition. The network had waited years for proof she survived. Their patience finally found reward. Scattered loyalists recognized their true empress through layers of verification. The physical evidence of her eyes provided the first confirmation. Her knowledge of sealed historical details offered the second. But the decisive factor was something less tangible. The way she carried herself despite hardship, the clarity of her voice when speaking about governance, the absence of bitterness when discussing her father's legacy. These qualities couldn't be faked or manufactured. The network began activating dormant protocols. Messages traveled through secure channels to cells across multiple sectors. The news spread cautiously, each transmission risking exposure, but the confirmation justified the danger. Years of silent waiting ended with careful, deliberate movement. What had been isolated whispers began forming a coherent pattern, a web of loyalty stretching across Imperial space. The loyalists spoke the name in hushed tones, a place more rumor than location. Sigma 7. Emperor Cases had prepared for the unthinkable long before his death. He understood that power attracts challenges, that even the most stable reigns face threats from within. His contingency plans included secure facilities scattered beyond regular patrol routes, places where continuity could survive even if the capital fell. These preparations weren't about fear, they were about responsibility to something larger than any single ruler. The station's coordinates remained encrypted within multiple security layers. Only a handful of trusted personnel ever knew its true location, their knowledge protected by neural blocks and biometric verification. The Council's purge had eliminated most of these individuals, their deaths made to look like accidents or routine casualties of service. Finding Sigma 7 required more than navigation data. It demanded accessing memories that survivors had buried deep for their own protection. Director Lyra Thane had escaped the purge through sheer circumstance. She was conducting long-range sensor calibration beyond comms range when the coup occurred. By the time she returned, the Council controlled all official channels. She went dark immediately, erasing her ship's logs and diverting to a prearranged emergency location. Her survival represented both hope and immense risk. If the Council captured her, they could extract Sigma 7's coordinates through forced neural interrogation. Military historians note that wise leaders often create redundant systems for succession crises. They establish lines of communication that bypass normal chains of command, stockpile resources in unexpected locations, and empower deputies who can operate independently if central authority collapses. These measures seem paranoid during peaceful times but become vital when institutions fail. Sigma 7 embodied this principle, a place where legitimacy could be preserved against temporary disruptions of power. The station housed crystalline matrices in its secure core. These weren't ordinary data storage devices, but quantum-entangled structures that could record not just information, but consciousness patterns. They stored verified genetic signatures of the royal line, including detailed neural mappings of Emperor Cases himself. The matrices could authenticate lineage through biological markers that couldn't be falsified, providing proof that went beyond documents or testimony. These same matrices contained recorded commitments from loyalists across the empire. Military commanders, sector governors, and fleet admirals had secretly pledged their support through neural imprint ceremonies. Their vows weren't just words, but full cognitive recordings, their memories, their intentions, their absolute commitment to the rightful heir. This archive represented the Empire's true loyalty, hidden from the Council's purges and surveillance. Sigma 7 became the key to everything. Proving her legitimacy required more than simply appearing before people and claiming her birthright. The Council had too thoroughly poisoned her reputation, too completely controlled the narrative. She needed evidence that couldn't be disputed, confirmation that would convince those still loyal but cautious. The station offered not just verification, but the means to rally that support into action. The technology represented something beyond political restoration. The matrices held echoes of her father's consciousness, fragments of his wisdom and experience. They contained the voices of supporters who had died protecting her claim, their final commitments preserved in crystal. This wasn't just about reclaiming a throne. It was about reconnecting with what had been lost, about honoring sacrifices made in darkness. Accessing Sigma 7 meant confronting the full weight of her inheritance. The station contained not just tools for victory, but the emotional legacy of those who had believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. The journey there would test every skill she had learned, every alliance she had formed. The matrices waited in silence, their crystalline structures holding patterns of light that could illuminate truth or extinguish hope forever. Her violet eyes were merely the surface indication of something far more significant. Beneath that distinctive pigmentation lay enhanced neural capabilities inherited through generations of selective royal genetics. This biological advantage allowed direct interface with artificial intelligence systems and neural networks without requiring external hardware. Her mind could connect to computational systems through focused concentration, processing data streams that would overwhelm ordinary humans. This gift represented both incredible power and profound vulnerability. In the wrong hands, such ability could be weaponized to control entire populations or manipulate critical infrastructure. The Council understood this potential all too well. They had already perverted the royal genetic legacy into a system of collective control. Their version required invasive implants and forced compliance, a crude imitation of the natural interface her lineage possessed. Whoever controlled her could potentially access systems previously reserved for emperors alone. She could sense networks around her like invisible architecture. In the workshop, she felt the hum of power conduits as tangible vibrations. Communication signals registered as faint pressures against her awareness. This sensitivity had been a confusing burden during her exile, an unexplained phenomenon she tried to ignore. Now understanding its source, she began recognizing patterns in the electronic noise surrounding her. The Imperial surveillance systems became visible in her mind as webs of energy intersecting throughout the settlement. Genetic research documents how biological traits can evolve to interact with technology. Specialized neural structures allow certain individuals to process electronic signals as naturally as others process sound or light. These capabilities often emerge in populations that develop alongside advanced technology, creating symbiotic relationships between biology and machinery. The royal family's genetic line represented a perfected version of this adaptation, refined over centuries to maintain control across interstellar distances. Emperors used this ability to monitor far-flung territories without delay. They could access data from remote outposts instantly, communicate with fleet commanders without transmission lag, and oversee planetary administrations through direct neural links. This capability created a governance system where distance became irrelevant, where the ruler's awareness could extend to the empire's farthest reaches simultaneously. The gift ensured stability through constant, immediate connection. The Council had twisted this concept into something monstrous. Their artificial control system forced compliance through neural implants, that hacked voluntary motor functions. They created a networked consciousness where individual will dissolved into collective obedience. Their version lacked the subtlety and reciprocity of the natural royal interface. It was pure domination without balance, control without wisdom. They built a prison for minds across the empire, calling it progress while destroying free thought. Her natural ability offered the key to disrupting their artificial system. Where their technology forced connections, hers could negotiate them. Where their system demanded submission, hers could offer partnership. The very genetics they had portrayed as dangerous actually contained the antidote to their mechanical oppression. Her biological inheritance could communicate with their machines in ways they couldn't anticipate or prevent. This realization transformed her perspective completely. The trait that had made her a target became her greatest advantage. The biological marker that forced her into hiding now represented her best chance of fighting back. Her curse and her weapon were the same thing, a genetic gift misunderstood and feared by those who sought to control it. The violet eyes that hunters scanned for would guide her to reclaim what had been stolen. Not just her throne, but the very nature of connection itself. The neural sensitivity she had struggled to comprehend became a tool she could consciously employ. She began testing its limits cautiously, reaching toward nearby systems with focused intention. A surveillance drone hovering near the workshop suddenly switched to standby mode. A communication relay briefly filtered out certain frequencies, small actions, easily dismissed as glitches but proof that her ability could affect the technology around her. Each successful interaction built confidence in this unfamiliar part of herself. She discovered she could sense the artificial control network as a discordant presence at the edge of her awareness. Its signals felt harsh and invasive, compared to the natural energy flows she normally perceived. The system operated on principles of compulsion rather than cooperation, its patterns aggressive and unsustainable. Understanding its nature helped her recognize its weaknesses, points where gentle pressure could create significant disruption. Her biology held the code to unraveling their technological tyranny. Imperial patrol craft established a perimeter around the settlement's perimeter, their search patterns tightening with systematic precision. Kale and Ara found themselves cornered near the abandoned mining equipment at the sector's edge, their retreat cut off by overlapping surveillance sweeps. The patrol had anticipated their movement, funneling them toward a dead-end canyon where escape seemed impossible. The rocky walls rose steeply on three sides, the only exit blocked by advancing Imperial forces. Concealed panels slid open in the canyon walls. Automated defense turrets emerged with smooth mechanical efficiency, their barrels rotating to acquire targets. The weapon systems were vintage Imperial design, self-contained units programmed to eliminate unauthorized biological signatures within their designated kill zones. Their activation protocols required no human oversight once triggered, making them relentless and unforgiving. Red targeting lasers painted precise points on chests and foreheads, the visible promise of immediate execution. The turrets cycled through their firing sequence with automated calm. Hydraulic systems adjusted elevation and azimuth, calculating windage and atmospheric interference. Their programming contained no capacity for negotiation or hesitation. They existed solely to neutralize threats within their operational parameters. Their decision trees reduced to binary outcomes: target eliminated or target within engagement parameters. The air hummed with charging energy cells, the sound of capacitors building toward lethal release. Ara closed her eyes, shutting out the visual threat of the weapons. She focused inward, reaching toward the electronic presence of the turret's control systems. Her mind brushed against their programming like fingers across instrument controls. She felt the rigid logic of their attack protocols, the cold efficiency of their target acquisition routines. The interface felt different from the workshop's machinery, sharper, more aggressive, but still comprehensible. Military automation always contains vulnerability points. The most sophisticated systems retain backdoor access protocols for maintenance and updates. Empire-era designs particularly favored hidden command channels that bypassed standard security measures, allowing authorized technicians to perform emergency overrides. These access points remained undocumented in most manuals, known only to certified Imperial engineers and certain high-ranking officers. The turrets before them were no exception. Her neural gift allowed direct communication with the turret's core programming. She didn't need passwords or encryption keys. Her biological signature provided authentication at the most fundamental level. She felt the systems recognize her presence, their aggressive programming pausing in confusion. The royal genetic markers in her neural patterns created a conflict in their simple logic. Here was both unauthorized presence and legitimate authority. She sent a command, sequence buried deep in Imperial military code. The turrets immediately switched to diagnostic mode, their barrels freezing in position. Status lights changed from red to amber along their housing units. The targeting lasers winked out, replaced by gentle scanning beams that mapped the area without hostile intent. The sleep command was an ancient royal override installed generations earlier, a failsafe against automated systems turning against their creators. Few living beings even knew it existed. The temporary ceasefire created a narrow window for escape. The turrets would remain in diagnostic mode for precisely 97 seconds before rebooting to their original programming. The Imperial patrol advancing toward the canyon would reach their position in approximately 2 minutes. The timing was tight but workable, provided they moved immediately and without error. Kale didn't question the sudden reprieve. He recognized the shift in the machine's behavior and reacted accordingly. He guided her toward a fissure in the canyon wall that he remembered from earlier surveys. The passage was narrow and unstable, but it offered cover from both the turrets and the approaching patrol. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the sudden silence where moments before had been the promise of certain death. She had translated biological inheritance into tactical advantage. The genetic gift that made her a target now provided protection. The violet eyes that hunters sought became the key to disabling their weapons. Her birthright, once a liability in exile, revealed its practical value in survival. The encounter demonstrated that her greatest weakness could also be her strongest weapon, provided she learned to wield it properly. The experience changed her understanding of what she carried within herself. This wasn't abstract royalty or symbolic lineage. This was a tangible capability that could affect the physical world. The neural interface that had once confused her now offered clear utility. She began viewing her genetic inheritance not as a curse to be concealed, but as a tool to be mastered. The princess was learning to wield her biology as skillfully as any weapon. Merrick's ship rested on landing struts that groaned under its weight, a patchwork freighter assembled from salvaged parts in desperation. The vessel showed scars from countless blockade runs, carbon scoring along the hull, mismatched plating, engine mounts welded repeatedly. He stood at the loading ramp, his eyes calculating their worth before they even spoke. Passage off Virex required payment up front, he explained. His rates were non-negotiable, his loyalty reserved for currency, not causes. The amount he named exceeded anything they could possibly gather, a sum designed to discourage beggars and dreamers. Kale studied the freighter's systems while Merrick outlined his terms. He noted the unstable power readings from the port engine, the flickering status lights on the environmental controls, the telltale vibration indicating misaligned thrusters. The ship needed significant repairs before it could attempt another run, let alone evade Imperial patrols. He interrupted the smuggler's pricing lecture with a simple offer, his technical services in exchange for passage. He would repair what needed fixing, no questions asked, and they would board as passengers when the work was complete. Merrick's expression shifted from mercenary to appraiser. He walked around Kale slowly, evaluating his hands, his posture, the way his eyes tracked the ship's systems. The smuggler recognized practical skill when he saw it, understanding that some problems couldn't be solved with credits alone. His neutrality wasn't ideological, it was economic. Helping fugitives brought complications, but quality mechanical work kept him alive. The calculus of risk versus reward suddenly included a new variable. Economic systems outside formal structures often operate through barter and skill exchange. Currency becomes unreliable when governments collapse or turn predatory. In these environments, practical abilities hold more value than accumulated wealth. Kale's offer leveraged this reality. His capacity to fix critical systems represented tangible value that Merrick needed immediately. The smuggler's hesitation lasted only moments before he nodded, extending a grease-stained hand to seal the agreement. The work began immediately. Kale focused on the most critical systems first, stabilizing the power distribution network, realigning the thrusters, repairing the environmental controls. Ara assisted, her hands now familiar with tools, her understanding of systems growing with each task. They worked through the night, the freighter's interior illuminated by work lights and diagnostic displays. Merrick watched from the cockpit, his initial skepticism gradually replaced by professional respect. The smuggler's neutrality began showing subtle fractures. He shared information about patrol patterns, suggested alternate routes, offered spare parts from his hidden inventory. These small kindnesses weren't motivated by sudden loyalty but by practical appreciation. Good mechanics were rare on the frontier, and those who fixed your ship deserved more than strict transaction. His self-interest expanded to include their survival, not from idealism but from recognition of mutual benefit. The freighter transformed under their hands. Systems that had limped along for months now functioned with smooth efficiency. The engine's vibration faded to a steady hum. The power readings stabilized. The environmental controls maintained perfect equilibrium. Merrick ran final checks with growing satisfaction, his fingers tapping console readouts that now showed optimal performance. The ship felt different, not just repaired but revitalized, capable of challenges that seemed impossible days earlier. Their passage was secured not through currency, but through competence. The battered freighter became their means of escape, its repaired systems their ticket toward Sigma 7. Merrick's grudging respect became their first external validation, proof that their cause could appeal even to those motivated solely by practical concerns. The vessel lifted from Virex's surface carrying more than passengers. It carried the beginning of an alliance forged in shared work, rather than shared ideals. The revolution gained its first spacecraft not through battle or persuasion, but through the quiet application of skill-meeting demonstrated need. They lifted off as the storm reached its peak, the howling winds shaking the freighter's frame. Orange dust swirled around them in thick clouds, reducing visibility to near zero. Imperial sensors relied heavily on visual and thermal tracking during atmospheric exits, and the storm provided natural cover that even their advanced technology struggled to penetrate. The freighter's engines strained against the turbulence, their repaired systems holding but protesting under the stress. Warning lights flickered across the console, each alert a reminder of the ship's precarious condition. Merrick guided them along smuggling routes that avoided standard patrol lanes. These paths followed gravitational anomalies and radiation zones that masked engine signatures, turning navigational hazards into advantages. His hands moved confidently across the controls, his experience evident in every adjustment. He knew exactly when to push through turbulence and when to ride the currents, his understanding of Virex's atmosphere born of countless risky departures. The storm that threatened to tear them apart also shielded them from detection. Cale monitored the engine performance with intense focus. He made constant adjustments to power distribution, balancing strain across systems to prevent overload. His repairs were being tested under the worst possible conditions, each vibration and shudder measuring their effectiveness. He communicated with Merrick through short technical phrases, his attention divided between readouts and the storm outside. The freighter's aging systems struggled but held, their limitations carefully managed through skill and timing. Heir assisted with navigation, her neural sensitivity providing an additional layer of awareness. She felt the Imperial sensor sweeps as gentle pressures against her consciousness, their patterns becoming familiar through concentration. When a patrol ship adjusted its search vector toward their position, she sensed the shift immediately. Her warning allowed Merrick to change course moments before their engine signature would have been detected. Her unique ability transformed from theoretical advantage to practical tool, its value proven in the urgency of escape. They broke through the upper atmosphere, just as the storm began to dissipate. The freighter shuddered violently during the transition, its hull temperature rising dangerously near tolerance limits. For a terrifying moment, the engines faltered, their output fluctuating as atmospheric pressure dropped abruptly. Then space opened before them, black and silent after the chaos of the storm. The sudden calm felt unnerving, their senses adjusting to the absence of buffeting winds and swirling dust. Imperial pursuit ships launched from the orbital platform seconds too late. Their faster engines quickly closed the distance, but Merrick had anticipated their response. He engaged the freighter's modified thrusters, pushing them toward a nearby asteroid field that served as a natural maze. The pursuit ships hesitated at the field's edge, their commanders unwilling to risk damage in the chaotic debris. The freighter disappeared among the tumbling rocks, its signature blending with the natural background radiation. Virex dwindled to a dull orange sphere behind them, its harsh environment now just a memory. The planet that had been their prison for months became one more world among countless others. The transition felt gradual yet absolute. One moment they were fugitives fighting for survival, the next they were travelers moving toward possibility. The freighter's cabin, once filled with tension, now held the quiet anticipation of people who had escaped certain capture. The journey toward Sigma 7 began not with celebration, but with focused preparation. They had escaped the immediate danger, but greater challenges awaited. Merrick plotted their course through little-used navigation channels, avoiding major trade routes and patrol sectors. Kale continued monitoring systems, making adjustments to improve efficiency now that they were free of atmospheric constraints. Ara watched the star patterns shift outside the viewport, her mind already turning toward what came next. The freighter carried them forward, its engines humming with renewed purpose, leaving Virex and its memories behind. The alert reached council chambers through secured intelligence channels. A transport audit revealed anomalies in Virex's departure logs. Satellite imagery showed an unauthorized vessel exiting during the storm. The council had considered the princess permanently contained, her existence reduced to a managed problem on a remote world. Their intelligence apparatus had assured them the situation was stable. Now their certainty fractured. Her survival threatened the entire narrative they had constructed. The story of the traitor princess required her to remain isolated and powerless. An active fugitive created variables they couldn't control. Council members reviewed the reports with growing tension. Their carefully maintained facade of control showed its first crack. The escape demonstrated that their systems weren't as impenetrable as they claimed. They responded with immediate escalation. Bounty offers doubled, then tripled as alerts spread through enforcement networks. Hunter teams received priority clearance for equipment and personnel. Tracking specialists were recalled from other assignments. The response was disproportionate, reflecting their anxiety rather than strategic calculation. They were treating the escape not as a containment issue, but as an existential threat. Political science observes that regimes often overreact to challenges to their legitimacy. The Council's extreme response followed this pattern precisely. They intensified propaganda broadcasts, saturating communication channels with warnings about the dangerous fugitive. Her image reappeared on screens across the Empire, now accompanied by new allegations of sabotage and terrorism. The messaging became more aggressive, more frequent, more insistent. Internal purges began within Imperial administration. Mid-level officials who had expressed doubts about the original charges found themselves reassigned or investigated. Loyalty screenings increased dramatically, creating an atmosphere of suspicion within government structures. The Council was eliminating potential sympathizers before they could become actual threats. Their paranoia began damaging the administration's functionality. Moderate citizens observed these actions with growing concern. The extreme measures seemed mismatched to the threat of a single fugitive. People who had accepted the original narrative now questioned its validity. The Council's brutality toward internal critics suggested insecurity rather than confidence. Their overreach planted seeds of doubt where none had existed before. The architects of her downfall now confronted the consequences of their creation. They had designed a perfect villain to justify their power grab. But a story requires control over all its elements. A living, moving protagonist introduced unpredictability. Their narrative depended on her remaining a symbol rather than becoming an actor. Now she was acting, and their control over the story was slipping. Their response undermined their authority in subtle ways. The increased surveillance and purges created resentment among previously compliant citizens. The excessive bounty offers suggested desperation rather than strength. The propaganda campaign's intensity felt manipulative rather than informative. Each overreaction weakened their position slightly, each extreme measure creating new skeptics. The Council found themselves trapped by their own fabrication. They had to maintain the fiction of her monstrous threat, while also explaining how one young woman could evade their entire security apparatus. The contradiction became increasingly difficult to manage. Their communications team struggled to balance these competing narratives, often resorting to vague warnings about hidden conspiracies and unknown capabilities. They had turned her into a legend through their own actions. The princess they had tried to erase was now more present in the public consciousness than ever. Their attempts to destroy her had instead amplified her significance. The Council's reaction demonstrated the fundamental weakness of power built on lies. It collapses when reality refuses to cooperate with the fiction. Their authority, once seemingly absolute, now showed its fragility. News of her escape traveled through hidden channels, passing from loyalist to loyalist in coded messages and dead drops. The reports carried more than just the fact of her survival. They spoke of her abilities, her resilience, and the growing evidence of her legitimacy. Former Imperial officers who had quietly resigned after the coup began reaching out through secure channels. Their offers of support came with technical assistance, strategic advice, and access to restricted information. Each communication represented both hope and danger. Every new contact potentially a council trap designed to infiltrate their network. They established contact through recognition protocols Emperor cases had created decades earlier. These weren't simple code phrases, but complex linguistic patterns woven into seemingly ordinary conversations. The verification process required specific responses to historical references only those close to the royal family would know. Each successful authentication built confidence while weeding out imperial plants. The system prioritized security over speed, accepting slower recruitment to ensure reliability. Historical analysis demonstrates how resistance movements grow through networks of trust rather than public declarations. Support spreads through personal connections and shared values, developing strength through diversity of skills and positions. The Loyalist network expanded to include technical specialists who understood imperial systems, communications experts who could bypass surveillance, and logisticians who knew supply routes. Military officers provided tactical assessments of imperial weaknesses, their knowledge of fleet deployments and security protocols proving invaluable. Each new member increased the network's capabilities, but also its vulnerability. Council intelligence operated extensive monitoring operations designed to detect exactly this kind of underground activity. Their algorithms analyzed communication patterns, financial transactions, and movement records for signs of coordination. The Loyalists had to move with extreme caution, their operations designed to appear random and disconnected even when highly organized. Technical personnel offered skills the movement desperately needed. Engineers developed methods to disrupt imperial surveillance, programmers created secure communication channels, and mechanics modified equipment for covert operations. Their contributions transformed abstract support into practical capability. The network began functioning as a shadow administration, its competence growing with each successful operation. Military officers shared critical knowledge of imperial defensive arrangements. They identified patrol gaps, security weaknesses, and personnel who might be persuaded to switch allegiances. Their strategic assessments helped plan safe routes and identify potential rally points. The information transformed from theoretical to actionable as more officers joined the cause. The movement gained substance beyond hopeful whispers. What began as isolated individuals sharing frustration evolved into a structured organization with clear goals. Safe houses were established, supply lines organized, and communication networks secured. The network developed redundancy and compartmentalization, ensuring that no single point of failure could destroy the entire operation. This expansion demonstrated how ordinary kindness can challenge entire systems of control. The compassion of one mechanic on a frontier world had created ripples that now reached across star systems. His simple act of offering food to a stranger had set in motion forces that threatened an empire built on fear and deception. The network's growth proved that tyranny's greatest weakness isn't military opposition, but human connection. Individuals who had felt powerless alone discovered strength in coordination. The Council's control depended on isolation and fear, but the network provided alternative connections that bypassed their authority. Shared purpose created bonds that surveillance couldn't detect and punishment couldn't break. The uprising grew from the bottom up, its foundation built on mutual trust rather than top-down command. One man's decision to help someone in need had become the catalyst for something far larger than anyone could have anticipated. The network continued expanding, its growth fueled by the same basic humanity that had started it all. Compassion proved more contagious than fear, more resilient than oppression, more powerful than armies. The revolution was building its foundation not in weapons or strategies, but in the simple recognition of shared humanity. Kale never requested payment, titles, or recognition. His workshop on Virex remained their primary operations center, a cluttered sanctuary where engine parts and rebellion plans occupied the same workbenches. He continued repairing machinery for other settlers, maintaining the appearance of normalcy while coordinating secure communications and supply routes for the growing loyalist network. The dusty, ozone-scented space functioned as both repair shop and command center, its ordinary exterior concealing extraordinary activities. His neutral status evaporated completely once the network activated. Imperial surveillance noticed his increased communications and unusual supply requests. Hunter teams began monitoring his movements, their scanners frequently sweeping his workshop. The mechanic who had avoided attention now stood at the center of a widening circle of interest. Every interaction carried potential consequences. Every shipment might be tracked. Every visitor could be an informant. The price of his compassion became visible in the increased risks surrounding his daily life. Psychological studies of prolonged conflicts show how altruism evolves under pressure. What begins as simple compassion often develops strategic dimensions when survival becomes collective rather than individual. Kale's technical skills proved essential to building their capabilities. He modified communication devices to bypass Imperial monitoring, created hidden compartments in transport containers, and developed power systems that could operate undetectably. His workshop became an innovation lab where practical solutions emerged from limited resources. He taught Lara engineering principles she had never needed to learn. They spent hours over schematics, his hands guiding hers through complex wiring configurations. She learned to distinguish engine signatures by sound, to troubleshoot navigation systems, to recognize the subtle signs of tampering in communication equipment. His teaching method remained patient and practical, focused on application rather than theory. The princess who had once commanded fleets now learned how to repair their propulsion systems. Their relationship deepened through shared purpose. The initial compassion that prompted him to offer food evolved into mutual respect and strategic partnership. He saw her not as a symbol but as a determined individual fighting for justice. She saw him not as a subordinate but as an equal whose skills complemented her own. The connection between them grew stronger with each challenge overcome, each risk shared, each small victory achieved. His compassion transformed into tangible strategic advantage. The communication network he built allowed loyalists to coordinate across sectors. The modified ships he repaired could evade Imperial patrols. The weapons systems he calibrated gave their limited forces disproportionate effectiveness. Each technical solution emerged from his fundamental desire to protect and assist, now applied on a scale he had never anticipated. The mechanic's kindness became the revolution's infrastructure. The partnership between princess and commoner demonstrated how personal connections can spark larger movements. Their relationship provided the foundation for trust that extended throughout the network. Others saw their collaboration as proof that different parts of society could work together toward common goals. The alliance between royal legitimacy and practical skill became a model for the new order they sought to create. Mercy became their revolutionary strategy. Where the council ruled through fear and force, they built through cooperation and capability. The compassion that had begun with a single nutrient bar now guided their entire approach. They sought not to destroy the empire but to redeem it, not to conquer but to restore. Their methods reflected their origins, practical, inclusive, and fundamentally humane. The workshop on Virex stood as silent witness to this transformation. The same space where Kale had fixed engines now hosted planning sessions that would change the galaxy. The tools that had repaired mining equipment now modified weapons for defense. The man who had simply helped someone in need now coordinated a movement that challenged imperial tyranny. His compassion had ignited something that no amount of force could extinguish. The Council's declaration of martial law across frontier sectors arrived as a fleet-wide broadcast, its tone cold and absolute. Curfews were imposed, movement restricted, communications monitored. Their response to the growing whispers of resistance had shifted from targeted suppression to blanket control. Citizens now faced severe penalties for actions previously considered minor, questioning official statements, failing to report suspicious activity, even expressing doubt about the Council's authority. The peaceful neutrality many systems had maintained became impossible under the new regulations. Their cruelty, became the rebellion's best recruiter. Frontier worlds that had accepted council rule out of practicality now witnessed its harshness firsthand. Farmers were detained for missing check-in deadlines. Merchants had their shipments confiscated over paperwork errors. Families faced separation for minor violations. The council's overreach turned cautious citizens into active opponents, their tolerance for authoritarian rule exhausted by its relentless application. Systems that had remained neutral began quietly sharing resources and information, their self-interest aligning with resistance. Political history repeatedly demonstrates how authoritarian control undermines itself through excessive force. Regimes that mistake compliance for loyalty often discover that fear only works until it becomes intolerable. The Council's brutal response created unity among previously disconnected groups, giving them common cause against a shared oppressor. Their network expanded faster than ever, fueled by outrage rather than hope, powered by necessity rather than ideology. Their capabilities had grown significantly. Military officers provided access to secure channels and tactical assessments. Intelligence analysts shared decryption keys and surveillance schedules. Engineers developed methods to counter Imperial scanning technology. The network now possessed not just determination, but actual capacity. Ships could be rerouted, communications could be intercepted, operations could be coordinated across sectors. They had moved from survival to strategy, from reaction to planning. The time for hiding had clearly passed. Remaining underground now meant accepting permanent oppression. They began detailed preparations for the journey to Sigma 7, understanding that revealing the station's secrets would change everything. Navigation routes were plotted through contested space, avoiding patrol concentrations and checkpoints. Contact protocols were established with loyalist cells along the way, creating a chain of support across the Empire. Each step forward carried immense risk but also the promise of revelation. The choice awaiting them extended beyond tactical considerations. How they pursued justice would define the empire they hoped to rebuild. The Council had ruled through fear and retaliation, creating a cycle of violence that consumed everyone it touched. They could repeat that pattern or establish something different, a system where mercy tempered justice, where restoration mattered as much as victory. This decision would influence countless worlds watching their actions, measuring their values against the Council's brutality. The galaxy held its breath, aware that change was coming but uncertain of its shape. Stories about the violet-eyed princess had spread further than the Council's propaganda, taking root in places where truth still mattered. People who had never seen her face knew her story. The unfair accusation, the miraculous survival, the growing resistance. She had become a symbol before she could become a ruler, a legend before she could prove her leadership. The future waited for her next move, for the reveal of what kind of sovereign would emerge from exile. Her journey from Coronation Hall to exile revealed the Empire's true nature. What appeared as order was control. What seemed like justice was fear. She learned that power built on lies will always crumble. One mechanic's simple compassion challenged an entire system. His offer of food and shelter became a quiet rebellion. That single act built trust where none existed, creating alliances that crossed class and loyalty lines. The revolution began not with weapons or declarations, but with a shared nutrient bar in a dusty workshop. Sometimes the smallest kindness shakes the strongest throne.